She didn't throw a punch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move from her seat. But when three sailors surrounded her in that cafeteria, laughing, grabbing her ID badge, telling her she didn't belong anywhere near a military installation, something shifted in the room. Not because she demanded it, because one of them finally noticed the small, worn combat ribbon clipped to the strap of her bag. The laughter stopped. The air changed. And the woman they'd been mocking, the one in the plain blue shirt, eating alone, saying nothing, hadn't moved an inch. She didn't need to. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, because you won't see the ending coming. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see just how far this story travels. The cafeteria at Brenton Naval Station operated on an unspoken social contract, the kind that nobody wrote down but everybody understood. Rank had a table, service branch had a corner, and contractors, civilian support staff, maintenance workers, logistics coordinators, they took what was left, usually near the far wall by the recycling bins, close enough to the exit to make a quick disappearance if someone in uniform decided they'd accidentally wandered into the wrong room. Abigail Carter didn't take the contractor table. She took a middle seat at a foretop near the window, set her tray down with the deliberate quietness of someone who had learned a long time ago not to make noise that could get her killed, and started eating her soup without looking up. She was 34, medium height, lean in the way that came from hard years and not gym memberships, with calloused hands that didn't match the plain blue civilian shirt she was wearing. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. No jewelry except for a small titanium ring on her right hand that she turned occasionally, not consciously, just a habit. The bag on the chair beside her was military surplus, not the fashionable vintage kind, the real kind, worn down at the shoulder strap, with a single combat ribbon clipped to the buckle. The ribbon was dusty. She hadn't cleaned it. It wasn't decorative. She'd forgotten it was even there. She was 3 spoonfuls into the soup when she heard them coming. 3 petty officers, mid-20s, still carrying the loose swagger of men who believed their uniforms made them larger than they were. The one in front, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had probably gotten him through a lot of situations by sheer confidence alone, saw her sitting there and slowed his approach the way a person slows when they found something that doesn't belong. "Hey," he stopped at the edge of her table. "This section's for active personnel." Abigail looked up. She took him in. Not the uniform, not the rank insignia, just the expression. And she looked back down at her soup. "There's no sign." "Don't need a sign. You can see the room." "I can see a room with empty tables." The man beside him laughed. Not with her. It was the specific kind of laugh that's designed to make someone feel small, the sound of a group closing ranks. The third one, youngest looking, maybe 22, shifted on his feet. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but he said nothing. The first man, his name tape read Hayes, leaned a forearm on her table. Not sitting, just crowding. "You got a badge?" "I do." "Let me see it." She met his eyes. "Why?" "Because I asked." He said it the way people say things when they're used to nobody pushing back. Base policy. Any civilian on installation has to provide ID when asked by active personnel. That wasn't exactly base policy. It was a mangled interpretation of a real regulation, the kind that gets twisted in the mouths of people who want justification for what they were going to do anyway. Abigail knew this. She considered pointing it out. She decided for a moment to let it go the boring way. She reached into her bag, unclipped the lanyard, and set the contractor badge on the table. Hayes picked it up. "Read it." His expression didn't change much, but his posture shifted. The slight recalibration of a man who'd expected one thing and found something slightly different. "Abigail Carter, logistics support." He said it like he was reading evidence. "Logistics." He looked at the man beside him. "She's supply chain." "I know what my badge says." "So you know you're not active military." He set the badge down, not handed it back, set it down, 2 inches farther from her than necessary. "This section's for service members, not support contractors." "I ate here yesterday?" "Well, you shouldn't have." He straightened up, crossed his arms. "There's a contractor section. Near the recycling bins. Near the..." He caught himself almost smiling at his own joke, then rearranged his face. "The rules apply to everyone. If you've got a problem with it, you can file a complaint at the administrative office." A pause. That's in Building C, past the loading dock, in case you're familiar with the area. The man beside him, Torres on his name tape, laughed again. Still the wrong kind of laugh. Abigail looked at her soup. It was getting cold. She'd driven 40 minutes from the Harwick Logistics Depot to Brenton for this meeting. The soup was the first thing she'd eaten since 6 that morning, and the meeting itself wasn't for another 2 hours. She breathed in, breathed out, and said nothing. "You hear me?" Hayes asked. "I heard you." "Then move." She didn't. It wasn't defiance, exactly. Not the theatrical kind. It was the stillness of someone who had learned, in very specific places under very specific conditions, that sudden movement was a liability. That stillness was not weakness. That there were ways to be immovable that didn't require raising your voice, and that the people who confused quiet with submission were usually the people who ended up looking foolish. Hayes leaned forward. "Look, I don't want to make this a thing." "Then don't make it a thing," she said. The third petty officer, Ellison, she'd clocked the name earlier, shifted again. Definitely uncomfortable. He caught her eye for exactly half a second and looked away. "You're a contractor," Hayes said, voice dropping, taking on the particular edge of someone who wants to escalate without looking like they're escalating. "You don't have the same rights in this space as active military personnel. That's not an opinion. That's installation protocol. Now I'm asking you politely. You haven't been polite. To move to the designated contractor area before this becomes a disciplinary issue." She looked up at him. Not angry. Something more careful than angry. "Disciplinary for who?" she asked. Hayes blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm asking a question. Disciplinary for who? You're a petty officer. I'm a civilian contractor on a valid badge. The section dividers in this cafeteria are not posted policy. If you want to make this official, I'm happy to wait while you get your CO. She picked up her spoon. "I'll be right here." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Hayes stood there for a moment, jaw working slightly, recalculating. The middle option, the easy out where she just moves and everyone pretends it didn't happen, had closed. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't cried. She'd just refused quietly, with the specific tone of someone who knew exactly where the line was and was standing 6 inches on the right side of it. "Fine," he said. He reached down and picked her badge up again, and this time he didn't set it back down. He held it. "Give that back," she said. "I'll hold it until the CO clears you." "That's not how this works." "That's how this works today." She set down the spoon. She looked at the badge in his hand, then she looked at Hayes, and something in her expression shifted. Not to anger, not to fear, something quieter and more settled. The look of someone who has had harder days than this one and remembers what they felt like. "Petty Officer Hayes," she said, "you're going to give me back my ID." He smiled, not a nice smile. "And why's that?" She didn't answer. She watched him. Across the cafeteria, the ambient noise of 200 people eating had dropped 3 or 4 decibels without anyone making an announcement. People were watching, not staring. The careful peripheral watching that military people learn, all the information in the side of your vision. At the table to her left, a group of 4 Marines had gone very still. One of them, a gunnery sergeant, older, with the built-in weathering of someone who had been stationed places that didn't make it into recruitment materials, was looking at Abigail's bag, specifically at the ribbon clipped to the shoulder strap. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked closer. His face did something complicated. Hayes was still talking. Something about base regulations. Something about how civilian contractors had been getting out of hand with boundary issues lately. Something about how he didn't make the rules. He just enforced them. Abigail wasn't listening to the words. She was watching the Marines. The gunnery sergeant stood up slowly. He walked to the recycling station, which happened to pass within 4 feet of Abigail's table. On his way by, he looked at the ribbon again. Really looked. And then he looked at her. His expression was unreadable in the way that only people with extensive military experience can be unreadable, where nothing shows because it's been trained out of them, but something was happening behind it. He went back to his table, said something low to the Marine beside him. That Marine turned to look. Then he said something to the 2 others. Hayes had moved around the table now, closer, the full territorial encroachment, the physical language of a man who has run out of verbal options and is defaulting to presence. I'm going to need you to gather your things, he said. I don't think you are, she said. You don't. He stopped. The gunnery sergeant was standing behind him. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't saying anything. He was just standing there, hands loose at his sides, looking at Hayes with an expression that was somehow, despite its complete neutrality, the most unfriendly thing in the room. Hayes turned around, caught off guard by the proximity. Gunnery sergeant, what's that ribbon? The gunnery sergeant asked. Not to Hayes, to Abigail. She glanced at her bag. Combat action, Camp Harith rotation, 412 deployment. The silence she got back from that was a different quality than the silence from before. The gunnery sergeant's name tape read Reed. He stared at her for a long moment, and something happened in his face. Not shock, exactly, not recognition of a person, but recognition of something else. A category. A classification. 412, he said. Eastern Corridor. And the ridge approach, she said. His jaw moved like he was chewing on a word that hadn't made it out yet. He turned to the 3 Marines at his table, who had all stood up by now and were watching with an attention that had nothing casual about it. Harith, 412, he said to them. Just that. The youngest of them, a lance corporal, couldn't have been more than 23, went visibly pale. Hayes was standing there, holding Abigail's badge, suddenly very aware that the conversation had moved somewhere he didn't have the map for. I don't know what, he started. What's your name? Reed asked him. Petty Officer Hayes, sir. I didn't ask your rank. Reed's voice was level. I asked your name. Hayes, Ryan Hayes. Reed looked at the badge in Hayes's hand, then he looked at Abigail. Is he holding your ID? He is. Reed turned back to Hayes. Give her the badge. Something flickered across Hayes's face, the instinct to push back, the calculation of rank and branch and who had authority over whom in this specific situation. And then it ran into whatever Reed's expression was doing and stopped. He held the badge out to Abigail. She took it. Thank you, she said to no one in particular. What's your name? Reed asked her. She looked at him for a moment, then, Abigail Carter. He repeated it quietly, like he was running it against something in his memory. Then he looked at her bag again. At the ribbon. At her hands. At the particular way she was sitting, back straight, weight forward, the posture of someone who spent years in environments where slumping wasn't an option. You were an engineer, he said. It wasn't a question. Combat engineer, 22nd Battalion. The lance corporal at Reed's table said something very quietly to the Marine beside him, and that Marine closed his eyes for a half-second like he'd just heard something hit him. Hayes was still standing there. Torres had stepped back 2 feet without appearing to notice he'd done it. Ellison, the youngest one, was looking at Abigail like she had transformed into something else in the last 90 seconds, which wasn't entirely wrong. Reed started, then stopped himself. He looked at her again with that complicated expression. People called you something, on the Eastern Corridor. She looked back at her soup. People call people a lot of things. The dozer, the lance corporal said from across the room. His voice had gone flat with something that wasn't quite awe, but was adjacent to it. The table went quiet. Abigail picked up her spoon. I'm going to finish my lunch, she said. She said it without aggression, without performance, without any of the energy of someone who needed the moment to land. She just said it because it was true. Because she was hungry and the soup was going cold and she had a meeting in 90 minutes and she was tired. Hayes stood there, another beat. Then he said very quietly, I didn't know. No, she said, you didn't. She ate. He didn't move her. The cafeteria resumed its noise in the specific way that crowds do after something has happened that nobody is ready to officially acknowledge. The volume returning, the forks scraping, the conversations restarting, but a different quality to all of it, a residual charge in the air like after lightning. At Reed's table, the 4 Marines sat back down. Reed didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The lance corporal was staring at the middle distance with an expression that suggested he was doing some rapid reassessment of several assumptions he'd been operating under. Abigail finished the soup. She was reaching for the bread roll when Torres, the one who'd laughed, the one with the wrong kind of laugh, came back. He was alone this time, without Hayes, without Ellison, and he looked different, smaller, not in size, but in the way that people look when the performance has stopped. Hey, he said, not aggressive. He gestured at the empty chair across from her. 1 second. She looked at him. I just want to say I'm sorry, he said, still standing. We were out of line. She studied him. Your buddy took my badge. I know, he exhaled. I know he did. I should have said something. I didn't. No, you didn't. He absorbed that. I don't know your service record, but even if I did or didn't, that's not how you treat someone. He met her eyes, and he wasn't performing anymore. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, small. Sit down if you want. He sat. He was quiet for a moment, then, the dozer. She didn't respond. I've heard that name, he said. My older brother he did a Harith rotation. Different year than 412, but he stopped. He talked about what happened on the Eastern Ridge. The bread roll was good, actually, softer than she'd expected. What happened on the Eastern Ridge is documented in the official debrief, she said. If your brother was there for a different rotation, he's hearing secondhand. He said 11 men came home because of one engineer who held a position alone for 6 hours until evac arrived. She said nothing. He stopped himself. That's not my business. I know. He shook his head. Why are you even working logistics? Why are you a contractor on base and not, my right knee doesn't like me anymore? She said it flat, like a fact about weather. Honorable discharge, knee reconstruction. I did 3 years of PT and it's fine for everything except the things it's not fine for. She looked at him. I still know how to do the work. I know these installations better than most people who are walking them in uniform. This is how I stay useful. Torres looked down at the table. That's normal, she said. It's normal. A lot of people transition. Don't make it into something. He nodded. They were quiet for a moment. At the far end of the cafeteria, through the glass partition that separated the main dining area from the corridor beyond, she could see Ryan Hayes standing with another sailor, older, higher rank, the kind of posture that meant an explanation was being extracted rather than offered. Hayes was talking. The other man was not. His expression was the very specific expression of a superior officer who has just been told something that is going to require paperwork. Abigail watched them through the glass. Torres followed her gaze. He saw Hayes. He saw the expression on the other man's face. He exhaled through his nose. That's Lieutenant Commander Voss, he said quietly. He stopped. Hayes is going to have a hard afternoon. That's between Hayes and his command, she said. Yeah. Torres was quiet again. Then, would you have said anything if Reed hadn't come over? She thought about that. Honest question, deserved an honest answer. I would have made him get his CO, which would have ended the same way, probably, slower. You weren't scared. She looked at him. I've been scared, she said. That wasn't what that was. He nodded like that made complete sense, because it did. Through the glass, Hayes and Lieutenant Commander Voss had moved further down the corridor, out of sight. Whatever was happening in that conversation was happening away from the cafeteria, away from witnesses, but the direction of it was clear. Abigail looked at the clock on the far wall. 1:20 until her meeting. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded equipment manifest, set it on the table beside her tray. The manifest was covered in handwritten notes in the margins, shorthand that nobody else would be able to read, abbreviations from a system she'd developed herself over years of tracking parts across 3 continents. She uncapped a pen. Torres watched her start working. I'll let you... He stood up. Thank you for letting me sit. She nodded without looking up. He left. The cafeteria moved around her. At Reed's table, one of the Marines had his phone out, tilted toward the others, showing them something on the screen. She caught a glance of what looked like an official record page. And then Reed looked up and caught her looking, and she looked back at her manifest. Whatever Reed had found to show them was his own business. She worked through the manifest for 20 minutes, found 3 discrepancies in the inventory from the previous week's delivery, flagged them in red, made a note to pull the shipping receipts before her 2 o'clock. She was finishing the bread roll, which was, genuinely, excellent, when she heard the cafeteria go quiet again. Different kind of quiet this time. She looked up. A man in officer's uniform was walking through the main entrance of the cafeteria. Major's insignia. He was 40-something, gray at the temples, walking with the unhurried pace of someone who already knew what they were going to find. Behind him, two more personnel. One was Voss, the lieutenant commander she'd seen through the glass, and beside him, a woman in civilian clothes who carried a recorder and a notebook and had the specific energy of someone from the Inspector General's office. The major scanned the cafeteria. His eyes landed on Abigail. He walked to her table. She watched him come. She felt the room watching both of them. He stopped 2 feet from her table and he said, "Are you Abigail Carter?" "I am," she said. He said his name, Major Daniel Cross, Installation Command, and he asked if he could sit down, and she gestured at the empty chair, and he sat down across from her, and the woman with the recorder took a position slightly to the side, not recording yet, just present. Cross folded his hands on the table. He had a quality of directness that wasn't aggressive, just efficient, the manner of someone who had learned that the shortest distance between 2 points usually saved lives. "I've been briefed on the incident this afternoon," he said. "I want to hear your account directly." She told him, concisely, factually, without editorializing, Hayes' approach, the demand for ID, the removal of her badge, the specific regulation Hayes had cited and why it was a misapplication, the sequence of events. She left out Torres's apology because it wasn't relevant to the incident as a factual matter, and she left out the Lance Corporal and what he'd said because that was between Marines. Cross listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're listed in our contractor system as Abigail Carter, Logistics Support," he said. "That's accurate." "It is." "You're also listed in military records as former Staff Sergeant Abigail Carter, 22nd Combat Engineer Battalion, 7 years active service, 2 operational deployments, including the Harith rotation, multiple commendations, honorable discharge due to service-related injury." He paused. "That's also accurate." "Also accurate," she said. He looked at her. "Why didn't you lead with that?" She thought about it for a second. "Because it shouldn't matter," she said. "The way he treated me would have been wrong regardless of my service record. Leading with credentials to make someone back down?" She shook her head. "That's not how I want to win that argument." Cross studied her for a moment. He had the expression of someone who had been a long time in an institution and occasionally, rarely, encountered something that reminded him why the institution was supposed to exist. "Petty Officer Hayes is currently being debriefed," Cross said. "His actions today will be reviewed under the UCMJ provisions regarding improper exercise of authority and conduct unbecoming, as well as civilian contractor treatment protocols." He kept his eyes on her. "The review process has started. That's not dependent on any decision you make." This moved up the chain the moment Lieutenant Commander Voss was informed. She nodded. "Is there anything you need from the Installation Command at this time?" he asked. She looked at the clock. "A to-go cup for coffee," she said, "and confirmation that my 2 o'clock is still on." Cross almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but it got close. "We'll take care of both," he said. He stood. He looked at her for a moment, and in that moment something passed across his face. Not sentiment exactly, but acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement that military people extend to each other that doesn't require words. He didn't salute her. She wasn't active military. He didn't shake her hand. But he looked at her the way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you see them. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Carter," he said. She looked back at her manifest. "Thank you for handling this properly, Major." He left. The cafeteria stayed quiet for another beat, and then it started up again. Louder than before, actually, the specific post-incident energy of a space where something real had happened and everyone was sorting out what they'd witnessed. Abigail recapped her pen. She looked at the equipment manifest, found where she'd left off. At the edge of her vision, she could see Gunnery Sergeant Reed at his table, watching her with an expression she couldn't read and didn't try to. She pulled out her phone, sent a short message to the logistics coordinator she was meeting at 2. "Running on time. Cafeteria ran long. Have the Eastern Depot manifest ready." The reply came back in 30 seconds. "On it. Also what happened in the cafeteria because 3 people have texted me about it." She put her phone face down on the table. Outside the window, through the glass, she could see a stretch of base grounds, concrete and low buildings, and the flat sky of a mid-autumn afternoon. And further, the faint line of the mountains that she could see from her apartment if she stood on the right side of the balcony. She'd been back in civilian life for 2 years. 2 years of contractor work, of manifests and depot runs and supply chain audits, of learning to sleep without listening for things that weren't there anymore, of getting good enough at the boring parts that nobody needed to know about the other parts. She had not expected today. She had not expected Hayes, and she had not expected Reed, and she had not expected to see the face of the Lance Corporal when he said the name, the Dozer, with that gutted, involuntary reverence, like he was speaking a name he'd thought was just a story. She hadn't thought it would her, coming back to this work. She'd thought she could just be invisible, efficient, useful, without being seen. She gathered her tray, tucked the manifest into her bag, checked the combat ribbon was still clipped to the strap. She hadn't cleaned it. Still wouldn't. That wasn't what it was for. She was halfway to the tray return when she stopped. Reed was standing in the middle of the aisle, not blocking her, just standing there. His hands were at his sides and his face was doing the unreadable thing again, and he looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. 412, he said. I was in the rotation before yours. I know what that ridge looked like when we left it. She waited. I know what you were walking into, he said. She held his gaze, said nothing. We left records in the debrief about the Eastern approach, structural vulnerabilities, timing windows, extraction corridors. He paused. We didn't know if anyone would read them. Someone read them, she said. His jaw moved. How long were you alone up there? She looked at him for a moment. 6 hours and 11 minutes. He breathed out slowly. I'm sorry we didn't hold it. You got your people out, she said. That was the job. Yeah. He looked past her, at nothing. Yeah. She shifted the tray in her hands. Gunnery Sergeant Reed. He looked back at her. Whatever you're carrying about that ridge, she said quietly, you can put it down. It wasn't yours to carry. His face did something that it hadn't done through any of the preceding events. Something cracked through the surface of it, just briefly, the way old material cracks when the temperature changes. He nodded once. She nodded back. She went and returned her tray. She had 30 seconds of walking toward the exit before she heard it, behind her, from Reed's table, the scrape of a chair, and then another, and then 2 more. She didn't turn around, but she heard them rise, all 4 of them, in sequence, the way people rise when something is passed that deserves to be marked. She kept walking. Her knee ached. It always ached a little in the afternoon. She'd gotten good at the particular stride that distributed the weight differently, the almost undetectable accommodation that let her move like someone who didn't have a rebuilt joint. Most days she didn't think about it. She pushed through the cafeteria door and the outdoor air hit her, cold and clean and smelling like incoming weather. Her phone buzzed. She stopped walking. Unknown number, local area code. She answered. Miss Carter. The voice was official, clipped. This is Colonel Patricia Halverson, Brenton Installation Command. I understand you've had an eventful afternoon. Colonel, she said, I've been briefed. I want to tell you directly that the situation is being handled, that Petty Officer Hayes has been removed from active duties pending review, and that the installation is opening a formal investigation into conduct protocols for civilian contractors. A pause. I also want to ask you something. Go ahead, Abigail said. The wind moved through the base, rattling something loose on a nearby building. She stood on the concrete path outside the cafeteria and waited. I want to ask if you'd be willing to meet with me tomorrow morning, Halverson said. Not for the investigation, informally. Another pause, and for the first time the official cadence slipped, just a fraction. I served with a woman who knew you, Camp Harith. She said if I ever met the Dozer, I should buy her coffee and listen. Abigail looked up at the sky. The weather was definitely coming in. Big system, by the look of it. What time? She said. 7, Halverson said. I take my coffee black and I don't like small talk. Neither do I, Abigail said. 7 works. She hung up and stood there another moment, the wind picking up around her, the sky going the particular shade of gray that meant the system was moving faster than the morning forecast had predicted. She tucked her phone into her bag, felt the weight of the manifest inside it, and started walking toward Building D where her 2 o'clock was waiting. Her knee ached. She didn't slow down. The meeting at 2 ran long because the depot manifests were a disaster. Not her disaster, somebody else's accounting disaster, that she'd been brought in specifically to untangle, but the kind of disaster that required her full attention and produced the particular low-grade headache she got when she had to hold too many numbers in her head at once. She stayed until 5:30, filled 2 pages of her own notepad with figures that didn't add up and reasons they might not add up, and drove back to her apartment in Harwick with the radio off and the heat on because the temperature had dropped 15 degrees while she'd been inside. The apartment was the kind of place people lived when they were between something and something else. She'd been there 18 months, which was starting to tip from temporary into just where she lived, and she hadn't entirely decided how she felt about that. One room that served as living and sleeping, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a bathroom with a shower head that needed to be replaced, and that she kept meaning to request maintenance for and kept not requesting. A single shelf of books she'd actually read, a folding table she used as a desk. She made rice and whatever vegetables were in the refrigerator, ate standing at the counter because she hadn't unfolded the table yet, and spent the evening going through the depot paperwork until her eyes started going soft at the edges. She was in bed by 9:30. She lay there for a while in the dark, which was normal. Sleep had been a negotiation since she'd gotten back, not dramatically bad, not the kind of thing she'd talk to anyone about, just negotiated. She'd learned the terms, half an hour, maybe, of her brain finishing its work before it let her go. Tonight it ran through the cafeteria again. Not Hayes. Hayes she wasn't interested in spending mental energy on. Reed. The way his face had cracked. I'm sorry we didn't hold it. She'd meant what she told him. He could put it down. Whatever he'd been carrying about that ridge for however many years, it wasn't his. The math of that situation had never been anyone's fault. It had just been the situation, the terrible arithmetic of terrain and timing and what was available. She thought about the Lance Corporal saying the name. The Dozer. She hadn't heard anyone say it out loud in 2 years, hadn't thought about it much. It was the kind of name that happened to you, not one you chose. Somebody called you something in a high-stress moment, usually because you'd done something that needed a shorthand, and the shorthand stuck. She remembered when it started. Eastern Corridor, Day 3 of the Harith deployment. A corporal named Vickers, who'd watched her dismantle and rebuild a collapsed entry point, under fire in 40 minutes, and said, with the specific admiration of someone who can't believe what they're watching, she just dozed right through that whole thing. And it traveled, the way those things travel, through channels she hadn't tracked and didn't try to. She didn't want to be the dozer here. She wanted to find the discrepancy in the Eastern Depot inventory and sleep through a full night without negotiating. She closed her eyes. Colonel Patricia Halverson was already at the table when Abigail arrived at 7, which told her something. People who said 7 and meant it were usually there at 6:50. Halverson was mid-50s, compact and straight-spined, with the kind of face that had never been particularly soft and was better for it. She had 2 coffees waiting. She had no recorder, no notebook, no aid. She looked at Abigail when she sat down and said, "You look tired." "Good morning to you too, Colonel." Halverson almost smiled. The same almost smile Cross had managed the day before. Something about this installation and its officers being trained out of full smiles. "The woman who knew you," Halverson said, wrapping both hands around her mug, was Captain Donna Farrell. She ran logistics support for the Harith Forward Operating Base during your deployment. Abigail took a sip of coffee. It was good. "I remember Farrell. She's teaching at the War College now. She called me last night after someone texted her about what happened in the cafeteria here." Halverson's eyes were direct, not unkind, but built for accuracy. "News travels." "Apparently." She said, Halverson paused, choosing words. She said you were the most capable person she'd seen in a combat engineering role in 20 years of service, and that you were also the most determined to not be noticed for it. Abigail looked at her coffee. Farrell always had opinions. She also said you'd say something like that. Halverson set her mug down. "I want to be straight with you, Ms. Carter, because I think that's what you'd prefer. Yesterday was a failure on this installation's part. Not just Hayes. Hayes is one symptom. The system that let him behave that way without immediate correction, the culture in that cafeteria that let it go as far as it did before anyone intervened, that's on command. On me." Abigail looked at her. "I'm not saying this to manage you," Halverson continued, "or to protect the installation's record. I'm saying it because it's true, and because someone should say it to you directly." The morning light came through the window of the small officer's lounge at a low angle. the kind of autumn light that was mostly shadow. Outside, Abigail could hear the base starting its day. Vehicle engines, boot steps on concrete, the distant PA system. "What do you want from this conversation?" Abigail asked. Halverson appreciated the directness. It was visible. "Two things. First, I want to understand if there's anything the formal process is missing, anything about yesterday that should be part of the record that isn't." "There isn't." "All right. Second." Halverson picked up the mug again. "We're launching a contractor treatment review. Broader than just yesterday's incident. I want to know if you've seen patterns, not just here, but at other installations you've worked. Things that don't get reported because contractors don't have the same channels that active personnel have." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "That's a bigger conversation than this coffee." "I know." Halverson held her gaze. "I'm asking if you're willing to have it." The honest answer was that she'd seen plenty. Not all of it haze level, not all of it deliberate. Some of it was just the invisible friction of being a civilian in a military space, the 1,000 small signals that said you are adjacent to this, not part of it. She developed the ability to navigate it, as most long-term contractors did, but navigating it wasn't the same as it not existing, and she was tired of the navigation. "I'll think about it," she said. Halverson nodded. "That's fair." They drank their coffee. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had both spent years in environments where silence was functional, where you learned not to fill it with noise just because it was there. Then Halverson said, "Farrell told me what happened on the ridge." Abigail looked out the window. "I don't need you to—" Halverson started. 11 men, Abigail said. Not to Halverson, exactly. Just saying it into the room. The eastern approach had a 12-minute window before the second element came through. We had 4 extraction points and 3 of them were compromised. I spent the first 2 hours clearing debris from the 4th, and the next 4 hours making enough structural noise from the other 3 to keep attention on the wrong side of the ridge. She looked back at her coffee. It wasn't heroic. It was math. I was the one who could do the math fastest. "You were alone," Halverson said. "There was a corporal named Diaz with me for the first hour and a half. He took shrapnel in the second hour, and I put him in the extraction point and sealed it." She paused. "He made it. I don't know where he is now." Halverson looked at her with an expression that was the most human thing Abigail had seen on an officer's face in longer than she could remember. "You were 26 years old," Halverson said. 26 and 2 months. Abigail turned the titanium ring on her right hand. "Can we talk about something else?" "Yes," Halverson said immediately. "We can." They did. They talked about the depot inventory situation, which Halverson had awareness of because it involved base supply chains. They talked about the contractor credentialing system, which had 3 separate gaps that Abigail had identified in her first month and reported through the official channel and never heard back about. Halverson wrote things down on a small pad she produced from her jacket pocket. Real notes, actual attention, the kind of listening that resulted in action rather than the kind that was just a performance of listening. By 8:15, Abigail had a meeting to get to. She stood, picked up her bag, the combat ribbon on the strap, dusty present, and Halverson stood too. "One more thing," Halverson said. "Hayes is going to face a formal review board. I can't tell you the outcome in advance, and I'm not going to, but I want you to know that the installation is not treating this as an isolated personnel issue. We're treating it as a systemic failure. That means the record of yesterday is going in the broader file, not getting minimized." "Okay," Abigail said. "Is that enough? For you, personally?" She thought about it. Honest question. "It's more than I expected when I walked into that cafeteria yesterday," she said. Halverson extended her hand. Abigail shook it. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Carter." "Thank you for the coffee." She paused. "It was actually good. I wasn't expecting that either." This time, Halverson smiled. All the way. The week that followed was ordinary on its surface. Abigail worked. She sorted out the depot discrepancies. Turned out to be 3 separate data entry errors compounded across 2 software systems. The kind of thing that took patience and cross-referencing and a willingness to spend 4 hours staring at shipping receipts. She found the errors, documented them, submitted the corrected manifests. She drove the 40 minutes to Brenton twice more for follow-up meetings. She ate in the cafeteria both times. Nobody bothered her. That wasn't nothing. She noticed it, not with satisfaction exactly, but with the quiet awareness of someone who has learned to track the temperature of rooms. Reed nodded at her the second time she came in. That was all. She nodded back. That was enough. What she didn't track, because she wasn't paying attention to the channels it moved through, was what was happening on the other side of the installation. Hayes had been pulled from active duties the afternoon of the incident. That she knew. What she didn't know was that the formal review process had moved faster than most people expected, partly because the incident had multiple witnesses, partly because the recording from the cafeteria's security system was clear, and partly because Lieutenant Commander Voss had pulled Hayes's file and found that the cafeteria incident was not, as it turned out, an anomaly. There were 2 prior complaints, both from contractors. Both filed through the civilian contractor grievance system, which fed into a review queue that had a response time of, on average, 47 days. Both complaints had been sitting in that queue, unresolved for weeks. When Halverson saw the file, she was not loud about what she felt. She was quiet about it, in the specific way that people who have real authority are quiet when they are about to do something permanent. The review board convened 6 days after the incident. Abigail didn't know about any of this until the morning of day 7, when she was in the depot at Harwick going through a packing list, and her phone rang, and it was a number she recognized from the installation command offices. "Miss Carter." It was Halverson's aide, a young man named Pratt, whose voice always had the quality of someone reading from a prepared statement. "Colonel Halverson is asking if you're able to come to Brenton this afternoon, 1400 hours. There are some developments in the review process she'd like to brief you on in person." "She doesn't have to brief me," Abigail said. "She's aware. She'd like to anyway." Abigail looked at the packing list, half done. She could finish it in the morning. 1400, she said. Fine. She was there at 1:50, because she was always early. Not as a performance, just because being late to things created problems, and she had enough problems she didn't choose. Halverson's aide took her to a conference room on the 2nd floor of Building A, the kind of room that had a table long enough for 8 and was always used by only 3 or 4, with a window that looked out over the central grounds. Halverson was there. So was Major Cross. So was a woman Abigail didn't recognize, mid-40s, in civilian clothes with the particular bearing of someone who worked in oversight. "Ms. Carter," Halverson said, "thank you for coming. This is Deputy Inspector Laura Moss from the Regional Inspector General's office." Moss extended a hand. "Ms. Carter, we've spoken to a number of people about the incident last week. I wanted to speak with you directly." They sat. Cross had a file open in front of him that he wasn't looking at, which meant he already knew everything in it. "The review board completed its process this morning," Halverson began. "Petty Officer Hayes has been found in violation of UCMJ provisions relating to conduct unbecoming, improper exercise of authority over civilian personnel, and failure to comply with contractor treatment protocols. He's been formally reprimanded, reduced 1 grade in rank, and reassigned to a non-supervisory position pending a 12-month conduct review." Abigail sat with that for a moment. "The other complaints," she said, "the ones filed before mine." Cross looked at her. "You know about those." "I guessed," she said. "A person doesn't do that for the first time." Moss leaned forward slightly. "Those complaints are being reopened as part of the broader investigation. The contractors who filed them have been contacted. The review queue issue, the response time, is being addressed at the regional level." She paused. "That's a longer fix, but it's in motion." Abigail nodded. "There's one more thing," Halverson said. Something in her voice had changed register, just slightly. "The installation is implementing a revised contractor integration protocol. Formal training for all active personnel on civilian contractor rights and treatment standards. Mandatory, not optional." "That's good," Abigail said. "We'd like to ask—" Halverson paused. "We'd like to ask if you'd be willing to consult on the development of that training. Not lead it, not deliver it. Just consult. Give us the contractor perspective from someone who has both the military background to speak the language and the civilian experience to know what the gaps are." Abigail looked at her. "You'd be compensated for your time," Cross added. "Separate from your current contract." "That's not what I'm thinking about," she said. "I know," Halverson said. The window behind Cross showed the central grounds, and the flag at the center of them, and the line of low buildings, and further, the mountains, The same mountain she could see from her balcony if she stood in the right place. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking," Halverson said. Moss opened a folder and slid 2 documents across the table. "For your records, the outcome of the review board, with your incident listed as primary." She paused. "And the reopening notice for the prior complaints, so you know it's documented." Abigail looked at the documents. She didn't pick them up. She was thinking about the Corporal Diaz, who she'd put in the extraction point in the second hour and sealed in, who had made it out, who she didn't know the current location of. She was thinking about the way Reed's face had cracked when he said he was sorry. She was thinking about Torres, who had come back alone and apologized, and about the Lance Corporal, who had said the name and gone pale. She picked up the documents, folded them, put them in her bag, next to the manifest, under the combat ribbon. "The training protocol," she said. "I have conditions." Halverson raised an eyebrow. "Let's hear them." "It's not just about contractor treatment. It needs to cover veteran contractors specifically, people who separated due to injury or medical discharge and came back to work in support roles. The instinct to dismiss them is different from the instinct to dismiss a career civilian. It's about people assuming that if you're not in uniform, you don't deserve the same standing as when you were." She kept her voice even. "That's a specific problem, and it needs a specific solution." Cross was writing. "Second condition," she said. "The contractors who filed the prior complaints, if they want to be involved in the training development process, they get offered that before I do. They were there first." Halverson looked at her for a moment. "All right." "That's it," Abigail said. Moss gathered her folder. "I think we can work with that." They stood. Handshakes, the efficient kind. Abigail was heading for the door when Halverson said, "Ms. Carter?" She turned. "Donna Farrell called me again this morning," Halverson said. "She wanted to know if I'd found you yet." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I did." Halverson held her gaze. "She said to tell you that she still has your gear bag, from Harith. You left it in the Phoebe supply tent, and she's been keeping it for 2 years because she didn't have an address for you." Abigail went very still. She hadn't thought about that bag in 2 years. She hadn't let herself think about it. There were things in it, not weapons, not classified materials, just personal things. The small weight of a life that had existed in a version of herself she'd carefully stepped out of. And the fact that it had been sitting in storage, that Farrell had kept it, that it had been waiting. "I can get you her contact information," Halverson said. "I have it," Abigail said. Her voice came out steady. "I'll call her." She walked out of the building into the afternoon, the air cold and clean, the mountains at the edge of the sky, her bag on her shoulder with the dusty ribbon. She got to her car. She sat in it without starting it for about 2 minutes, which was unusual for her. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. She hadn't cried since the discharge process. Not because she was holding it, not deliberately, just because the occasions hadn't arrived where it would have been the right response. She didn't cry now. She just sat there with the weight of Halverson's words settling through her in a way she hadn't expected, and let the 2 minutes pass. Then she started the car. She was pulling out of the lot when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She read it at the first stop sign. It was from Diaz. "Corporal Miguel Diaz, Harith Rotation 412. Sergeant Reed gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I've been looking for a way to say thank you for 2 years and I couldn't find you. I just wanted you to know that I made it home. I have 2 kids now. I just wanted you to know." She sat at the stop sign longer than a stop sign required. The car behind her waited, then gently tapped its horn. She put her foot on the gas and drove, and she didn't look at the text again until she was parked outside her building in Harwick, because looking at it while driving was a safety issue, and she had always been precise about safety issues. She read it 3 more times. 2 kids. She typed back, "I'm glad you made it. Don't thank me. You held your position for 2 hours with shrapnel in your side. I just did the math." A pause. Then she added, "Take care of yourself, Diaz." She sent it. She sat there. She looked at the mountains in the distance. Then her phone buzzed again. Different number this time, the installation command prefix. And when she answered it, Pratt's voice said, with the particular quality of someone who is delivering information they don't fully understand the weight of, "Ms. Carter, I apologize for the late contact. Colonel Halverson wanted me to pass along that Petty Officer Hayes has submitted a written request to speak with you, voluntarily, outside of any formal proceeding." A pause. The colonel wants you to know there is absolutely no obligation and no pressure from command. The request is his, and the response, whatever it is entirely yours. Abigail looked at the mountains. Tell the colonel I heard her, she said. I'll let her know. She hung up. She got out of the car. She went upstairs. She stood in her small kitchen and started making dinner, and the rice cooker clicked and the wind outside pressed against the window. And somewhere across the base, a man who had taken her badge and laughed and told her she didn't belong was sitting with whatever he was sitting with. She put water on for the vegetables. She thought about the training protocol and the contractors who had filed before her, and the vault of a gear bag sitting in Donna Farrell's care for 2 years, and Diaz and his 2 kids. She thought about what she was going to say to Hayes. She didn't know yet. She wanted to get it right. Not for his sake, not for a performance of forgiveness, but because getting it right mattered to her in a way she couldn't entirely explain, the same way the math on the ridge had mattered, the same way the manifest discrepancies mattered, because precision in important things was not optional, and this was an important thing. She was still thinking about it when her phone lit up on the counter. This time it was Donna Farrell's number, and the text said only, I heard you're still doing the work. I never doubted it. Call me when you're ready. I have your bag and I have a proposition, and one of them is better than the other. Abigail stared at the screen. What proposition? She typed back. The reply came in under 30 seconds. There's a position opening at the War College. Civilian Contractor Training Development. Full program, 18 months, actual budget. They want someone who can build it from the inside. I told them I knew exactly who that person was and that she'd say no at least twice before she said yes. Abigail read it twice. Who else is being considered? She typed. Nobody, Farrell wrote back. I've been holding the slot for 6 weeks waiting for yesterday to happen. The rice cooker clicked again. Done. The vegetables were at a rolling boil. She turned down the heat, picked up the phone, looked at the message. Outside, a car alarm started and stopped on the street below. A dog barked twice. The ordinary sound of an ordinary evening in a city that had no idea that in an apartment 3 floors up, a woman in a plain blue shirt was standing in a too small kitchen making dinner and looking at a message that was asking her to step back into a world she'd thought she was finished with. She set the phone face down on the counter. She drained the vegetables. She ate. She picked the phone back up and typed, Send me the details. Farrell's response was immediate. Already did. Check your email. Also, the gear bag has your old field notebook in it. I looked. I shouldn't have. There are 17 pages of structural calculations in the margins of page 34 that I have shown to 2 engineering professors, and both of them want to know who wrote them. Abigail put the phone down again. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, where something was doing a strange thing. Not pain, not emotion exactly, just pressure. She thought about the ridge, the math, the 12-minute window, the 4 extraction points and 3 of them compromised and the one that wasn't, and the particular quality of silence that settled around her in hour 3 when she'd understood she was going to be there until it was over one way or another. She picked up the phone one more time. What did the professors say about the calculations? Farrell's reply came slowly this time, like she was choosing her words. They said whoever wrote them solved a structural load problem in the field that engineers have been trying to solve in lab conditions for a decade. They want to know if the person is available for a consultation. And then, before Abigail could respond, a second message arrived. Abby, the consultation is at the War College, the engineering department, in 2 weeks. I may have already put your name on the schedule. Abigail stared at the screen. She put the phone down. She picked it up. She typed, You scheduled me without asking. Yes, Farrell wrote back. That's correct, Farrell wrote. Also, the lead professor's name is Dr. Harmon, and she has been working on forward operating infrastructure resilience for 11 years. And when I showed her page 34, she said, and I'm quoting directly, Whoever did this math in the middle of a combat deployment either has a doctorate they're not using or we owe them one. The phone was warm in her hand. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the first real rain of the season had started, tapping against the window. And the street below was turning dark and wet. And somewhere across the mountains, the base was running its night operations, and Diaz was home with his 2 kids, and Hayes was sitting with whatever he was sitting with, and Farrell was waiting. Abigail looked at the rain. She thought about saying no. She thought about the math, and the notebook, and the 17 pages she'd written in the margins of page 34 because she'd had nothing else to write on, and the calculations needed to go somewhere before she lost them. She thought about the War College. She picked up the phone, opened the email from Farrell, and began to read. The subject line said, Position description, contractor training development, infrastructure and engineering focus. She was 3 paragraphs in when she stopped. Because buried in the 4th paragraph, in the language about the program's scope and intended reach, was a sentence that said the training would be implemented across 14 installations. And the first one on the list was Brenton Naval Station. She read it twice. She set the phone down, very carefully, on the counter. She looked at the rain. She looked at the phone. She looked at the rain again. And then her front door buzzed. The building intercom. Unexpected. Nobody she was expecting. And she crossed to it and pressed the button and said, yes? And the voice that came back was one she did not recognize, young, male, slightly unsteady, and it said, Ms. Carter? My name is Ellison. Aaron Ellison. I was there. Yesterday. I'm the one who didn't say anything when I should have. A pause, crackling over the intercom. I know this is strange. I got your building from someone who probably shouldn't have given it to me, and I can leave if you want. I came because I think I need to say something, and I couldn't figure out another way, and He stopped. Rain in the background, the sound of it hitting the concrete of the building entrance. She pressed the button. 3rd floor, she said. Take the stairs on the left. The elevator's broken. She heard him on the stairs before he knocked. Uneven footsteps, the hesitation of someone stopping twice before committing. When she opened the door, Aaron Ellison was standing in the hallway with rain on his jacket and the expression of a person who had rehearsed something on the drive over and had already lost the thread of it. He was younger than she'd registered in the cafeteria. Early 20s, maybe 22, 23, with the particular build of someone who had recently gone through basic training and hadn't quite grown into the uniform yet. Without the uniform now, in a gray hoodie and jeans, he looked younger still. I'm sorry for just showing up, he said. You said that on the intercom. She stepped back from the door. Come in. It's wet. He came in. He stood in her small entryway looking at the apartment with the careful politeness of someone who had been raised to not stare at other people's spaces, which meant he was doing exactly that but trying not to show it. Sit down, she said. You want coffee? I don't want to be I'm making it anyway. He sat at the folding table. She put the kettle on. She heard him behind her, the particular quality of silence from someone working up to something, rehearsing again, discarding the draft. How did you get my building address? She asked. Lance Corporal Osei, he said. He got it from Gunnery Sergeant Reed. I know that's not great. I'll talk to Reed about it. Please don't. I asked him specifically not to tell Reed I was coming. A pause. He told me anyway. Reed told Osei who told me, and I think Reed knew he was telling me. He exhaled. I think Reed wanted me to come. She turned to look at him. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, not fidgeting, which was a specific kind of effort. He met her eyes and didn't look away, which was also effort. Say what you came to say, she said. He said it. He said it in the way that young people say things when they've been awake too long thinking about them. Not cleanly, with doubling back and restarts, but honest in a way that polished delivery sometimes isn't. He said that he'd stood there in the cafeteria and watched Hayes take her badge, and he'd known it was wrong while it was happening. He said he'd known for the full length of it. He said that he'd told himself it wasn't his place, that Hayes outranked him, that it was a contractor thing and would get sorted through channels. He said all the things he'd told himself while standing there and doing nothing, and then he said, I've been thinking about what it felt like to know something was wrong and just stand there. And I've been thinking about whether that's the kind of person I am. He stopped. The kettle started. Is it? She asked. He looked at her. I don't want it to be. She poured the water. She thought about the ridge again. Not deliberately, it just came up, the way it sometimes did. The specific moment, hour 4, when she'd been working the 3rd decoy position and heard movement on the south face, and had to decide in about 2 seconds whether to hold her position or move. She'd held. It had been the right call, but she hadn't known it would be when she made it. That was the whole thing about decisions under pressure. You didn't get to know in advance. She brought 2 mugs to the table, sat across from him. What you did wrong, she said. was stand there. What you did right was come here. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Those are both true at the same time. You don't get to collapse them into one. He looked at the coffee. That's more than I expected you to say. What did you expect? I don't know, something harder. She shrugged. It was a hard thing that happened. That doesn't mean you need a hard response to fix it. He was quiet. Then, the dozer. What happened at Harith? What about it? Is that why you're so... He stopped, reconsidered. Is that why nothing Hayes did seemed to touch you? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Things touch me, she said. I've just had a lot of practice not showing it in the moment. She turned the ring on her right hand. It wasn't Harith that taught me that. It was everything before Harith. He nodded slowly. They sat there for a while. The rain was steady against the window. He drank the coffee and she let the silence run at its natural pace, not managing it, and he seemed to relax incrementally into the space, the way people do when they realize they're not being evaluated. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and said, Sergeant Reed said, he said the training protocol you're consulting on. He said it's going to matter. Reed talks too much, she said. He really doesn't, Ellison said. That's what made it significant. She closed the door. She stood in her entryway for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she went to the counter, picked up her phone, and called Donna Farrell. The 2 weeks between the phone call and the War College consultation moved at the particular pace of weeks that have too much in them. Not fast, not slow, just dense, each day carrying more weight than its hours should technically hold. She finished the depot audit, submitted the corrected manifests, got a formal acknowledgement from the Harwick logistics coordinator that used the word exceptional twice, which she noted and didn't comment on. She drove to Brenton 3 more times, twice for the preliminary contractor training consultation, once for a meeting with the 2 contractors who had filed prior complaints against Hayes. Their names were Patrice Oluwole and Garrett Finch. Oluwole was 51, a facilities maintenance supervisor who had been working military installations for 19 years. Finch was 38, a communications systems tech who had separated from the Air Force 8 years ago and transitioned to contracting. They were both invited to the consultation before Abigail, per her condition, and both had agreed. The 3 of them sat in a conference room in Building C with Deputy Inspector Moss and 2 people from the installations training division, and Abigail listened more than she talked for the first hour, because Oluwole and Finch knew things she didn't know, specific things, incidents with texture and detail that she needed to understand before she could be useful. Oluwole had filed her complaint after a lieutenant, different unit, different incident from Hayes, told her in front of a work crew that the facilities contractors were groundskeepers and should stay off the primary operations floor during active hours. She'd been on that floor doing mandated safety inspections. She'd had documentation. The lieutenant had dismissed the documentation because he hadn't seen it before and didn't recognize the form number. 19 years, Oluwole said, with the flatness of someone who has told a version of this story before and has stopped expecting a particular reaction. I know every form number on every installation I've worked. He didn't know that form because he'd been at this installation for 11 months. What happened when you filed? Abigail asked. Q, Oluwole said. 47 days and counting, as of last Tuesday. Then you happened, and suddenly things are moving. She said it without bitterness. Just fact. But the fact had weight. Finch's incident was smaller in visible temperature but had a longer tail. A petty officer, not Hayes, had systematically excluded him from technical briefings that were directly relevant to his systems work, claiming the briefings were for active personnel only. Finch had escalated through proper channels twice. Both escalations had gone into the same queue. His work had suffered because of the information gaps. A maintenance issue on the communications array had taken 11 days to resolve that should have taken 3, and Finch knew exactly why. He hadn't been in the briefings. 11 days, he said. In a different context, that's an operational failure. Here it was just a contractor complaint nobody read. Moss wrote everything down. The training division people looked increasingly uncomfortable in the way that people look when they realize the problem is bigger than the room they're sitting in. Abigail looked at Oluwole and Finch. I want to ask you both something directly. When we build this training, what's the one thing you want active personnel to understand that you don't think they currently do? Oluwole answered without hesitating. That we didn't stop serving. We just stopped being paid to serve the same way. Finch took longer. Then, that our expertise doesn't have a time limit. My clearance lapsed when I separated. My knowledge of those systems didn't. Abigail wrote both things down in her field notebook, on page 18, in the margins. The War College was a 2-hour drive north, through country that opened up into farmland past the midpoint, flat fields and tree lines, and the particular stillness of rural November. She drove it on a Tuesday morning, left at 5:30, arrived at 7:50, with enough time to find the right building without rushing. Dr. Harmon was 47, with the kind of energy that came from someone who thought faster than most people around them and had learned to pace themselves down to a conversational speed. She met Abigail in the corridor outside the engineering seminar room, offered a hand, and said, "I've been looking forward to this since Donna described what was on page 34. "She shouldn't have shown it to you without asking me," Abigail said. "She told me you'd say that. She also told me you'd come anyway." "She told you correctly." They went in. The seminar room had a long table and 8 chairs and a whiteboard that was already covered in equations from a previous session, not erased, just left there like the working residue of an ongoing problem. Harmon had a printed copy of the notebook page, a scan, high resolution, and she set it on the table between them. Abigail looked at her own handwriting from 2 years ago. Smaller than she remembered, tighter. The handwriting of someone working in low light with limited space. "Walk me through the load distribution model," Harmon said. "Start wherever makes sense." She started at the beginning. She explained the structural problem first. The 4th extraction point had a compromised eastern wall, partial collapse from earlier shelling, and she'd needed to calculate whether it could hold the weight of 11 men with gear moving through it in under 4 minutes without secondary collapse. She'd had the physical measurements from her own survey of the space. She'd had no calculator, no reference materials, just the math she'd built up over 7 years of applied engineering in field conditions. She talked through it the same way she'd done the work, methodically, without drama, treating it as a logistics problem because that's what it had been. Harmon listened with the focused stillness of someone receiving transmission they don't want to miss a word of. Occasionally she asked a question, always precise, always about the calculation rather than the circumstances. After 40 minutes, Harmon sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "You re-derived a load-bearing resilience formula under combat conditions," she said, "that the structural engineering field has been working toward formally for about 12 years. "I derived what I needed to solve the problem I had," Abigail said. "Those are the same thing. One of them is theoretical." Harmon looked at her. "You have a degree?" "Associates. Engineering technology. I was going to go further and then I enlisted instead." She paused. "No regrets about the enlistment?" "No, I wouldn't think so." Harmon leaned forward again. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear the whole question before you respond." "Okay." "There's a research program here, informal, not yet funded, but I'm in the process of proposing it, that looks at engineering problem solving in field conditions, not just military. Disaster response, search and rescue, infrastructure failure scenarios. The hypothesis is that the solutions generated under extreme time and resource constraints are often more efficient than laboratory solutions because they can't afford to be elegant. They just have to work." She tapped the printed page. "This is one of the most compelling examples of that I've ever seen. I'd like your permission to include it in the formal proposal, with full attribution." Abigail looked at the page. "What does attribution mean, practically?" she asked. "Your name, your background, the context in which it was derived. I won't sanitize the circumstances or make it abstract." Harmon held her gaze. "People need to understand that this math was done by a 26-year-old combat engineer alone in a damaged structure under fire. That's not background color. That's the point." The room was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a class was letting out. She could hear it, voices and foot traffic, and the particular energy of a building returning to motion. She thought about the ridge. She thought about the math being the point. She thought about Oluwole saying, "We didn't stop serving," and Finch saying, "My knowledge doesn't have a time limit," and Ellison standing in her doorway saying, "That's what made it significant." "You can use it," she said, "with attribution. All of it. The context, the circumstances, the specific conditions. Don't make it clean." Harmon nodded. "I won't. I want to see the proposal before it goes forward." "Of course." And I have a question for you. Harmon waited. The research program, Abigail said. The field conditions engineering. When it gets funded, and I think it will, what does the practical component look like? Is it purely theoretical analysis of existing cases, or does it involve training? Harmon studied her for a moment with the expression of someone who has just seen a move they hadn't anticipated. That's being determined. Because the contractor training program I'm building for Brenton, it has a technical component that could interface with something like this. Specifically, the veteran contractor element. People who did exactly what I did, applied engineering under field conditions, and then transitioned out and now work in support roles where that knowledge is invisible to the people above them. Harmon was quiet for a beat. Then she said, Donna told me you'd do this. Do what? Turn everything into something useful before you finish the conversation it came from. Harmon leaned back. She said you were incapable of letting an opportunity to solve a problem pass without at least attempting to solve it. That's not a flaw, Abigail said. It absolutely is not. Harmon folded her hands. Yes, the training component is being considered. Yes, it would be relevant. Yes, I'd want you involved. A pause. This is a lot of yes for one morning. I'll have it in writing before I commit to anything. I would expect nothing less. They talked for another hour. By the time Abigail stood to leave, 3 pages of her notebook were full, and she had 2 follow-up documents to request from Harmon and 1 name to look up, a researcher at a civilian university who had apparently been working on parallel problems from the disaster response angle and who Harmon thought she needed to know. She was walking out through the main building entrance when her phone rang. Halverson. Ms. Carter, I'm sorry to call during your War College visit. Is this a bad time? I'm walking out. What happened? A brief pause, the kind that happens when someone is choosing their words not for softness, but for accuracy. Petty Officer Hayes submitted a formal apology letter to the review board this morning. It will be part of his permanent record. He also submitted a separate written request, again, no obligation, to meet with you in person. Halverson paused again. The letter is available for your review if you want to see it before deciding. Send it to my email, Abigail said. Already sent. She pushed through the exterior door into the November air, cold and bright, the campus grounds extending in front of her, bare trees and institutional buildings, and a flag that moved in the wind. There's something else, Halverson said. This is why I'm calling today specifically. Abigail waited. The Regional Inspector General's office has been reviewing the contractor complaint queue system across all 14 installations in this region. Deputy Inspector Moss submitted her preliminary findings this morning. The findings are significant: systemic delay, documentation failures, multiple incidents that should have triggered review and didn't. A pause. They're recommending a full regional audit, all 14 installations. It's going to be a substantial process. That's good, Abigail said. Yes, and it's directly traceable to the incident at Brenton last week. Halverson was quiet for a moment. The audit is going to need a contractor representative on the oversight panel, someone with both military background and current contractor experience who can identify the gaps from both sides. She paused. I've submitted your name. I wanted to tell you before you heard it elsewhere. Abigail stopped walking. She was in the middle of the path, bare trees on both sides, the campus quiet around her. That's a significant ask, she said. It is. The position is voluntary and compensated. The panel meets quarterly over 18 months. Your contractor work can continue in parallel. It's not a replacement. I'm already consulting on Brenton's training program, and I've just agreed to an attribution request for a research proposal here. I know. Donna briefed me. A slight pause that might have been amusement. Ms. Carter, you're building something. I think you know that. I'm asking if you want the panel seat to be part of it. She looked at the flag moving in the wind. She thought about the math. The window. The 4 points and 3 compromised. The 4th one had held. I'll review the panel terms, she said. Send me the documentation. It's in the same email as the Hayes letter. She almost smiled. Of course it is. One more thing, and this one isn't a request, it's an FYI. Halverson's voice shifted slightly, the official cadence dropping just briefly, the same way it had over the first coffee. Gunnery Sergeant Reed has put in for a transfer to the training division, effective January. He cited, and I'm reading from his request, recent events that clarified the value of education over enforcement. A pause. I don't know if he told you. I thought you should know. Abigail absorbed that. He didn't tell me, she said. No, he's not the telling type. No, she agreed. He isn't. She stood there on the path for another moment after she hung up. A student walked past her, young, early 20s, carrying a stack of folders with the particular harried energy of someone running slightly late to something important. He passed without looking at her. She looked at the campus around her, the institution of it, the weight and history of what happened inside these buildings, the knowledge that moved through them, the decisions that got made here and then unmade the world out there. She thought about the notebook in her bag and the 17 pages of margin calculations that two professors had apparently been discussing since Farrell showed them the scan. She thought about Oluwole. 19 years, every form number. She started walking toward her car. She was reaching for her keys when a voice behind her said, "Ms. Carter?" She turned. It was a man she didn't recognize. 30s, civilian clothes, no insignia, but the particular bearing that was hard to fully wash off. He had a visitor lanyard around his neck and a folder under his arm, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to speak and had decided this was it. "I'm sorry to intercept you," he said. "My name is Warren Cade. I'm a consultant for the Regional Inspector General's office. I've been on site here for a conference the past 2 days." She waited. "I know about the panel appointment," he said. "I know Halverson submitted your name this morning." "That was this morning," she said. "How do you know about it?" Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Something more complicated. The look of a person who is about to say something they have weighed carefully. "Because I've been aware of your situation since the day after the cafeteria incident. I have context that the formal process doesn't have. About Hayes." He paused. "About what was in his file before the 2 contractor complaints." She looked at him steadily. "What does that mean?" He glanced at the path around them, empty. But the glance was involuntary, the habit of someone used to monitoring proximity. There was a third incident, before Oluwole, before Finch, a different installation 2 years ago, before Hayes transferred to Brenton. His jaw set. It was documented, internally. It was not forwarded to the complaint queue. It was resolved informally by a commanding officer who is no longer at that installation. The cold air moved between them. "Resolved how?" she asked. "The complainant, a veteran contractor, medically separated, similar profile to yours, was reassigned off the installation." He met her eyes. "Not Hayes, the contractor." The November light was flat and white above the bare trees, and Abigail stood on the path and felt the specific internal shift that came when the shape of a problem revealed itself to be different than you'd understood it. Larger, older, with roots in soil you hadn't seen yet. "Who was the commanding officer?" she said. Cade opened the folder he was carrying. He extracted a single printed page and held it out. She took it. She read the name. She looked up at him. "He's on the Regional Audit Oversight Committee," Cade said. "He was appointed last week. He has access to all 14 installation records, all contractor files, and the complaint queue database." He held her gaze. "And he knows your name is being submitted to the panel." The name on the page was Colonel Richard Farley. She read it twice, not because she hadn't understood it the first time, but because reading something twice was a habit from work that required precision, from engineering surveys, from manifest audits, from situations where misreading a number had real consequences. She wanted to be sure she was reading what she was reading. She was. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "The documentation of the third incident, 14 months. Cade's voice was level, the practice level of someone who had made peace with an uncomfortable answer. The original complaint was filed internally, flagged as resolved, and would have stayed buried if the contractor who filed it hadn't kept a copy. "Why didn't it go to the IG office 14 months ago?" He held her gaze. "Because the person who flagged it to us was afraid, and because we didn't have enough pattern yet to move without exposing her." He paused. "We have pattern now." She looked at the page again. Farley. Regional Oversight Committee. Appointed last week. Access to everything. She handed the page back to him. "You didn't intercept me by accident." "No." "You knew I'd be here today. Harmon told us you were coming. She's been aware of the broader situation for 3 weeks. She's the one who told Farrell to make the War College move." Abigail went still. Farrell knew, she said. Farrell has known about the Farley situation for 2 months. She didn't tell you because she needed you to arrive here through your own decisions, not through being recruited. He met her eyes steadily. If you'd been told at the beginning, you might have stepped back. And you stepping back was the one thing that couldn't happen. She stood on the path and absorbed this, the architecture of it, how it had been constructed around her, the cafeteria and the coffee with Halverson and the War College consultation and Farrell's email, all of it real, none of it manufactured, but all of it known about and gently oriented toward this moment. What do you need from me? She said. A statement, on record, formal, to the IG office, about the cafeteria incident, about Hayes, and about the systemic pattern. Your direct observations, your contractor experience, your assessment of the Q failure. He paused. Your name on the panel carries weight, but your voice on record carries more. When? Tomorrow morning, if you're willing. IG field office in Caldwell. 2 hours. She looked at the bare trees, the flag, the institutional white sky. Send me the address, she said. She drove back to Harwick with the heater on and the radio off, the same as the drive up. And she spent the 2 hours not thinking about Farley specifically, but thinking about the shape of what Cade had described, the way a system could absorb individual incidents, label them resolved, and move on, and how the only thing that made the pattern visible was enough incidents lined up side by someone willing to look at all of them at once. She thought about Oluwole. 19 years. Every form number. And a complaint sitting in a queue for 47 days because the system had been designed, whether intentionally or through pure institutional inertia, to absorb and delay rather than surface and fix. She thought about the contractor who had been reassigned instead of Hayes. She didn't have a name yet. She would ask Cade tomorrow. She got home at 7. She made dinner without tasting it, went through 2 more pages of depot manifests that needed finishing, and at 9 o'clock she opened her laptop and wrote Farrell an email. It was 4 sentences. You knew. I understand why you did it the way you did. I'm not angry, but next time, if there's a next time, you tell me first and let me decide. Farrell's reply came back in 11 minutes. Understood. I'm sorry. Also, you're right. And I'd do it the same way again. And I'm sorry about that too. Abigail read it, closed the laptop, and went to bed. She slept 6 hours without negotiating, which was the best night she'd had in 3 weeks. The IG field office in Caldwell occupied the 4th floor of a building that looked like it had been designed to be unmemorable and had succeeded. Cade met her in the lobby at 8:50 and walked her up to a room with a table, 2 chairs, a recording setup, and a woman named Senior Investigator Diane Vreeland, who had the specific quality of someone who had been doing this for long enough that nothing surprised her, but everything still mattered. Vreeland shook her hand. Thank you for coming, Ms. Carter. I want to be clear before we start. This is a voluntary statement. You can stop at any point. Nothing you say here is binding in a legal proceeding without your additional consent. I understand, Abigail said. Can I ask you a direct question before we start? Please. The contractor who filed the original complaint 2 years ago, the one who was reassigned. Vreeland looked at her steadily. Her name is Sandra Obi. She was a communications technician, 8 years Air Force, medically separated, contractor at Whitmore Installation when the incident with Farley occurred. A pause. She's been working in private sector logistics in Denton for 18 months. She gave us a formal statement 4 weeks ago. Has she been told about the panel? About the audit? She has. Is she involved? She's been offered the same panel consultation position you've been offered. Vreeland held her gaze. She accepted immediately. Abigail sat with that for a moment. Then, okay, let's start. She talked for 90 minutes. She was precise. Dates, times, specific language Hayes had used, specific regulation numbers he had misapplied, the sequence of events in the cafeteria, the response from command. She described the contractor working conditions she'd observed across 4 installations over 18 months. She described the Q system's failure not as a grievance but as a procedural analysis, the way she'd describe a structural deficiency. Here is the load, here is where it's failing, here is the consequence. Vreeland asked good questions, not leading, not suggestive, the kind that opened space rather than filled it. When Abigail described the moment Hayes took her badge, Vreeland asked simply, "What did you think would happen?" And Abigail said, I thought it would end the boring way. I thought he'd get his CO and be embarrassed and I'd go back to my soup. And Vreeland said, and instead? And Abigail said, instead it ended the right way, which took longer and mattered more. When she walked out of the building at 10:40, the November air was sharp and clean and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment before she called Halverson. The statement is done, she said when Halverson picked up. A brief pause. Cade told me you met with him yesterday. He should have cleared the contact with me first. He probably knew you'd have wanted to tell me yourself, Abigail said. About Farley. Silence on the line. Then, yes, I was going to. The IG moved faster than I expected. Halverson's voice had a quality Abigail hadn't heard in it before. Something tighter, less managed. Richard Farley has been at 6 installations in 12 years, Ms. Carter. He is very good at appearing to be the solution to problems he is partly responsible for creating. How long have you known about him? Suspected? 8 months. Known with documentation? 3 weeks. Since Moss started pulling the full regional file. A pause. His appointment to the Oversight Committee was a move I didn't see coming. I should have. How did it happen? He is well regarded. He has the right record, the right relationships, the right language. He talks about accountability better than almost anyone I've worked with. The bitterness in that last sentence was slight, but it was there. People like that are hard to see clearly until you have enough data points. The data points are lined up now, Abigail said. They are. Halverson was quiet for a moment. The IG is moving to remove him from the committee. Formal proceeding, probably this week. It will be handled at the regional level, above my authority, which is appropriate. She paused. I wanted you to know the timeline. I appreciate it. Ms. Carter. Halverson's voice shifted again, back to the register that was most natural to her. Direct, accurate, without decoration. Whatever happens with Farley, the audit moves forward. The panel moves forward. The work doesn't stop because one person in the process turned out to be part of the problem. That's actually... She stopped. What? That's actually the most important thing to hold on to right now, that the system is correcting, imperfectly, slowly, with too many years of delay. But it's correcting. Abigail thought about the 4th extraction point, the math, the wall that was compromised but not failed. I know, she said. The next 4 days moved with a momentum that felt different from the weeks preceding it, less like accumulation and more like convergence. Things arriving at the same point from different directions simultaneously. Cade called on Thursday to tell her that Farley had been formally notified of the IG inquiry. He was placed on administrative leave from the Oversight Committee pending investigation. The call was brief and factual, and when it was done, she sat at her folding table with her hands around a coffee mug and thought about Sandra Obie in Denton, working private sector logistics, who had given a statement 4 weeks ago and had been waiting. She found Obie's contact information through Cade. She looked at it for a day before she sent an email. She wrote, My name is Abigail Carter. You don't know me, but we've been in the same situation from different years. I'm on the audit panel, and I'll be working on the contractor training program. I want to make sure the program reflects what happened at Whitmore, not abstractly, specifically. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to hear it from you directly. Obie replied the same day. I've been hoping someone would ask. When are you free? They talked by phone on Friday morning. 45 minutes. Obie was sharp and direct and occasionally funny in the dark way that people are when they've processed something difficult enough to see the absurdity in it. She described the Whitmore incident with the same precision Abigail had used in her IG statement: dates, language, sequence. She described Farley's resolution of the complaint, a meeting in which she was told that the petty officer who had harassed her was under counseling, and that reassigning her would be in the best interest of the working environment. He made it sound like he was protecting me, Obie said. He was very good at that. He used the word protective 3 times in the meeting. What did you do? I took the reassignment because I needed the work, and I was 29 and I didn't know what else to do. A pause. I've had 8 years to think about that. I'm not interested in being ashamed of it anymore. You shouldn't be, Abigail said. You filed. That took something. Filing without consequences, I don't know what it is. It's not nothing, but it didn't feel like much at the time. It's part of the record now, Abigail said. It's what made the pattern visible. Obi was quiet for a moment. I know. I've been told that. I'm still working on feeling it. After she hung up, Abigail sat with that for a while. The distance between knowing something was true and feeling it is true. She understood that distance. She'd lived in it for 2 years, the stretch between knowing her service had mattered and feeling like she was still allowed to take up space because of it. She picked up her notebook and wrote Obi's name on the inside cover, next to 2 others she'd added over the past 2 weeks. The formal panel convening was on a Monday, 3 weeks after the cafeteria incident. It was held at the regional IG office in Caldwell, in a room large enough for the full panel, 12 people, a mix of active military, civilian oversight, and contractor representatives. Abigail sat between Obi, who she was meeting in person for the first time, and a retired Navy captain named Burrows, who chaired the session with the efficiency of someone who respected everyone's time enough to not waste it. Farley was not in the room. He was 2 buildings away, presumably, in whatever administrative holding pattern the investigation had placed him in. His absence was present, the shape of the thing that should have been here and wasn't, the gap that his appointment had created and that the panel was now beginning the slow work of filling. The session ran 3 hours. It covered the scope of the audit, the 14 installations, the complaint queue failures, the documentation gaps, the timeline for remediation. Abigail spoke twice, once to provide specific data points from her contractor experience, once to propose a structural change to the complaint intake system that would route veteran contractor complaints through a separate accelerated track with a mandatory 7-day response window. Burrows listened to the second proposal with the focused attention of someone doing real-time evaluation rather than performing attention. When she finished, he said, "That requires a policy change at the regional level." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm raising it here." He looked at her for a moment, then he wrote something on his pad. "It'll go in the recommendations." After the session, Obi found her in the corridor. "The 7-day track," she said. "That was for people like me." "It was for Oluwole and Finch too," Abigail said, "and everybody who filed and waited 47 days. Still." Obi looked at her. She was shorter than Abigail had pictured, with the steady presence of someone who had gotten very comfortable with their own weight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. It's a recommendation. It has to become policy." "I know." Obi almost smiled. "But it's a good recommendation." They walked out into the afternoon together, a Tuesday this time, cold and bright, the parking lot half full, the ordinary architecture of a day that had had something real in it. Abigail's phone buzzed. Halverson. Farley's formal removal from the committee was approved this morning by Regional Command. Inquiry is ongoing, that process will take months. But he's out of the panel. Thought you'd want to know before the afternoon briefings. She read it, showed it to Obi without comment. Obi read it. She breathed out slowly. Not relief exactly, the sound of something that had been held for a long time, not quite releasing but loosening, the first movement of a thing that had been fixed for too long. "Months," Obi said. "The inquiry." "That's how these things go," Abigail said. "It doesn't end fast." "Does it end right?" Abigail looked at the message again. The specific language, formal removal, approved, Regional Command. The machinery of it. The slow, imperfect, grinding institutional machinery that she had never entirely trusted and had spent 2 years keeping a careful distance from. And that was, despite everything, doing the work. "It ends better than it would have without the statement," she said. "Without Obi's statement, without yours." Obi was quiet. Then, "Is that enough?" "It's what we have," Abigail said. "So yes." She put her phone in her bag. Her hand brushed the combat ribbon on the strap. Dusty, still uncleaned, still present. She was heading toward her car when Kate appeared from the building entrance behind her, moving with the particular pace of someone who has news they want to deliver before it gets away from them. "Carter." He fell into step beside her. "One more thing from today's session." She slowed but didn't stop. "The documentation from the Whitmore incident, Obi's original complaint, the internal resolution memo, all of it. It's been fully entered into the regional record. Farley's name is attached to the resolution decision. That's permanent." He paused. "But when we pulled the full file, we found something else." She stopped walking. "The resolution memo," he said. "It was countersigned." She turned to look at him. "Farley wrote the resolution. Someone above him countersigned it. which means someone above him knew the complaint existed, knew how it was being resolved, and approved the reassignment of the contractor instead of the petty officer. He held her gaze. That person is still active, still in command. The parking lot around them was ordinary. Cars. Concrete. The flat white sky. A gull passing overhead for no reason she could account for, this far inland. "Who?" she said. Cade reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page, different from the one he'd shown her at the War College, smaller, a copy of something rather than an original, and held it out. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a copy of the counter-signature block from the resolution memo. The name beneath Farley's was Rear Admiral Thomas Wexler, currently serving as Director of Regional Installation Command, the position directly above Halverson's. The position with oversight authority over all 14 installations in the audit. The position that had approved the audit panel. The position that had approved her appointment to it. She looked at the name for a long moment. "Halverson doesn't know," Cade said. It wasn't a question. "She would have told me," Abigail said. "Yes," he said. "She would have." The wind moved across the parking lot, cold and direct. Somewhere behind her she could hear Obi's footsteps approaching, then stopping as Obi read the situation. The stillness of it, the held quality of the air between them, and went quiet. Abigail folded the page. She put it in her bag. She thought about the fourth extraction point, the wall that was compromised but not failed, the math you did when 3 of the 4 options were gone and you had to work with what was left. She thought about what you did when the thing you'd been using as the anchor turned out to be part of the problem. She looked at Cade. "Vreeland," she said. "Senior Investigator Vreeland. Is she cleared for this level of the inquiry?" "She's the one who found the counter-signature," Cade said. "Does she know about my panel appointment and who approved it?" "She does." "Then she already knows what I'm about to say." Cade waited. "If Wexler approved my appointment to the panel," Abigail said carefully, "and Wexler is now a subject of the inquiry, then my position on the panel has a conflict of origin that has to be disclosed to the full panel before tomorrow's session." She met his eyes. "Which means either I recuse myself until the conflict is resolved, or I go into tomorrow's session and disclose it myself and let the panel decide." "Which would you do?" Cade asked. She looked at him steadily. "I'd disclose, in the room, in front of everyone." She paused. "Because the audit exists to fix the problem of things being resolved quietly. I'm not going to resolve my own conflict quietly." Cade was quiet for a moment. "Vreeland will want to talk to you tonight," he said, "before tomorrow. Tell her to call me at 7. She walked to her car. She got in. She sat with both hands on the wheel and looked at the building in front of her, its unmemorable facade, its 4th floor where she'd sat 90 minutes this morning and said everything she knew into a recorder. Her phone rang at 6:58. She answered on the first ring. But it wasn't Vreeland, it was Halverson, and her voice had a quality in it that Abigail had never heard before. Controlled, still professional, but underneath it something that was close to shaken, the voice of someone who had just been told a thing that had restructured the last 8 months of their understanding. "I just got off a call with the IG office," Halverson said. "Ms. Carter." She stopped, restarted. "I didn't know. About Wexler. I need you to know that." "I know you didn't," Abigail said. "My entire command structure." She stopped again. "Colonel Halverson." "Yes." "The system is correcting," Abigail said. "That's what you told me." A long silence. "Imperfectly," Halverson said. "Slowly." "Yes," Abigail said, "but it's correcting." She heard Halverson breathe in on the other end of the line, the specific sound of someone steadying themselves against something that had not finished arriving yet. "Tomorrow's session," Halverson said. "What are you going to do?" Abigail looked at the building. "Exactly what I should do," she said. She spent the night preparing the way she'd always prepared for things that mattered, not by rehearsing what she'd say, but by getting clear on why she was saying it. The disclosure statement took her 40 minutes to write. She drafted it in her field notebook, on a blank page near the back, in the same tight handwriting that had covered the margins of page 34. She wrote it the way she wrote everything that needed to be exact. Once, with full attention, no crossings out. When she was done, she read it back to herself once, decided it was accurate, and put the notebook in her bag next to the folded counter-signature copy. She called Vreeland at 7, as agreed. The conversation was 20 minutes, mostly Vreeland walking her through what the IG office needed from the disclosure process. The specific language, the formal record, the timing within the session. Vreeland was efficient and unrattled, the quality of someone who had seen institutional structures fail before and had developed the specific skill of working inside the failure without being consumed by it. One thing, Vreeland said near the end. When you disclose tomorrow, Wexler will be notified within the hour. His people will know before the session ends. I expect that, Abigail said. He has relationships on that panel. 3 of the 12 members have worked under his command at various points. I know. She'd looked at the panel bios the night before. She'd done the math. 3 out of 12 isn't a majority. It's enough to slow things. Slowing things isn't stopping things, Abigail said. And I'd rather do this in the room than have it surface later through a channel I didn't control. Vreeland was quiet for a beat. You understand that disclosing tomorrow accelerates the formal investigation of Wexler significantly. Yes. And that it may complicate your panel position in the short term. Yes. Okay, Vreeland said. The word carried the weight of someone who had just confirmed a calculation they'd already run. I'll have an IG representative present in the room tomorrow. Cade. Good. She slept 5 hours. Not the 6 of this previous night, but enough. Her knee woke her at 5 with its usual low complaint about the cold, and she lay there for a while in the dark, doing the mental inventory she'd gotten into the habit of doing since her discharge. Not a formal process, just a quiet check. What is the situation? What is the next action? What is the variable she couldn't control? The situation was that a rear admiral had signed off on burying a harassment complaint 2 years ago, had leveraged his position to stay adjacent to the fix rather than accountable for the failure, and was now technically the authority that had placed her on the panel designed to investigate exactly that kind of behavior. The next action was to walk into a room of 12 people and say that clearly. The variable she couldn't control was how those 12 people would receive it. She got up at 5:30, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and looked at the dark street below, the rain from 3 weeks ago long gone, the November pavement dry and gray under the streetlights. She thought about Oluwole, 19 years and a complaint in a queue. She thought about Obi, 29 years old taking a reassignment because she needed the work. She thought about the Corporal Diaz, sealed into the extraction point at hour 2, waiting in the dark for the sound that meant it was over. She drank the coffee. She went to get ready. The panel convened at 9. The same room as the previous session. 12 chairs, the long table, the formal recording setup, Burroughs at the head with his efficiency and his notepad. Cade was in a chair along the wall, not at the table, the specific positioning of an observer with authority. She waited until the opening procedural items were done. When Burroughs moved to the first agenda point, she said, "Chair, I need to raise a disclosure item before we proceed." Burroughs looked at her. The room looked at her. "Go ahead, Ms. Carter." She opened her notebook. She read the statement she'd written the night before, not because she needed the text in front of her, but because formal disclosures should be read, not improvised, because the precision mattered. She described the countersignature. She named Wexler. She stated clearly that she had learned about the conflict of origin the previous afternoon, that she was disclosing at the earliest opportunity, and that she was prepared to recuse herself from any portion of the audit that directly implicated Wexler's decisions pending the panel's determination. She closed the notebook. The room held its silence for 3 full seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Burroughs raised a hand and the noise stopped. He looked at her. Then he looked at Cade. "Is the IG office aware of this documentation?" "The IG office produced the documentation," Cade said. Burroughs set his pen down. He looked at the table for a moment, the expression of someone doing a rapid internal reorganization of a situation they thought they had understood. "We're going to need a brief recess." The recess was 40 minutes. People moved into the corridor, into smaller conversations she was not part of, the particular social physics of a room that has just been reorganized. Obi found her near the window and stood beside her without speaking for a while. Then Obi said, 3 of the 12 are going to push back." "I know which 3, Abigail said. "So do I." A pause. "They're not bad people." "No," Abigail said. "They're people who worked under someone for years and built their understanding of him from that proximity. That's not the same as being bad. It'll still slow things. It'll still not stop things. Obi was quiet for a moment. You're very calm. I'm not calm, Abigail said. I just don't have a better option than walking back in there, so I'm not wasting energy on the feelings about it until I'm done. Obi almost laughed. It wasn't quite humor, but it was close. I've been doing that for 8 years, she said. I know, Abigail said. I could tell. When the session reconvened, Burroughs had a new piece of paper in front of him that he had clearly drafted during the recess. He read it into the record. The panel had reviewed the disclosure, confirmed it with the IG representative present, and was proceeding under a modified structure in which Ms. Carter's panel role would be formally separated from any inquiry elements directly connected to Wexler's command decisions. Everything else, the audit scope, the 14 installations, the complaint queue remediation, would proceed on schedule. 2 of the 3 members she'd flagged accepted this without visible resistance. The third, a captain named Griggs, who had served 2 years under Wexler's regional command, said, with respect, this disclosure significantly disrupts the panel's composition, and I think we need to discuss whether the integrity of the overall process. Captain Griggs, Burroughs said, with the specific quietness of someone who does not need volume to create effect, the integrity of the process is exactly why the disclosure was made. That is how integrity works. Griggs went silent. The session continued. It was a long session, 4 hours with a 20-minute break in the middle. The complaint queue remediation was the central agenda item, a detailed working session on what the accelerated review track would look like in practice, who would staff it, how it would be monitored. Abigail contributed to that conversation fully, without the restriction on the Wexler elements, because the queue fix was about all of it, about Obi and Oluwole and Finch and the dozens of cases the audit was already surfacing from the other 13 installations. The 7-day mandatory response window went into the formal recommendations as a primary item. Burroughs didn't just write it down this time. He asked for a motion, got one from Obi immediately, seconded it himself, and recorded it as a panel consensus recommendation to regional command. After the session, in the corridor, Griggs found her. He stood in front of her with the particular posture of someone who is working against their own reluctance. I want you to know, he said, that my concern was procedural, not, I know, she said. You weren't wrong to raise it. The process should be questioned. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had expected a different response and was recalibrating around it. Wexler was... He stopped. He was a good commanding officer, to me. That's probably true, she said. It doesn't change what he signed. Griggs absorbed that. His jaw moved. No, he said after a moment. It doesn't. He walked away. She watched him go. Not with satisfaction, not with any feeling that had a clean name, just with the awareness that the hardest part of the whole thing was never the people who were clearly wrong. It was the people who weren't entirely wrong about one thing while being wrong about another, and the work of holding both true simultaneously without collapsing them. The formal inquiry into Rear Admiral Thomas Wexler was opened by the IG office the following Thursday. It was not announced publicly in the way that some proceedings were. No press release, no immediate public record. But the notification went to regional command, to the 14 installation commanders, to Halverson, and to every member of the audit panel. Abigail heard about it from Halverson, who called at 7 in the morning with the clean, factual delivery of someone who had decided that plain information was the appropriate gift. The inquiry is formal and active, Halverson said. Wexler has been placed on administrative leave from the director position pending its completion. His deputy is acting in the interim. How long will the inquiry take? Months, possibly close to a year. A pause. These things don't move quickly, even when the documentation is clear. As long as they move, Abigail said. She drove to Brenton for the contractor training consultation that afternoon, the third session, the one where they'd get into actual curriculum structure rather than scope and principles. Oluwole and Finch were both there. So was a woman named Priya Shetty from the training division who had, over the course of the 3 sessions, transformed from someone who looked vaguely overwhelmed by the scope of the project into someone who was producing good work and knew it. They spent 3 hours building the veteran contractor module from the framework Abigail had proposed. Not abstract principles, but specific scenarios. Case studies drawn from real patterns without identifying details. The kind of material that made people recognize situations they'd been in rather than situations they'd only been told about. Oluwole contributed 2 scenarios directly from her 19 years. Finch contributed the communications briefing exclusion. Abigail wrote the structural notes and kept the group from going too broad. When the conversation wanted to spiral into general philosophy rather than specific behavior change. At one point, Shetty said, "This is the best training material I've worked on in 6 years, and I've worked on a lot of training material." "Thank you," Oluwole said, before Abigail could respond. "We have good source material." That was the right answer. Abigail let it stand. Walking to the car afterward, Finch fell into step beside her. He had the quality, increasingly, of someone who had been carrying something alone for a long time and was still adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of having put it down. "Wexler," he said. Not asking, just placing the name in the space between them. "Formal inquiry," she said. He nodded. "I've been thinking about something." He was quiet for a moment, watching the ground. "The thing that bothers me, and I'm working on whether it should or shouldn't, is how long it took. Not because of you, not the cafeteria, just how many years, how many people." "It should bother you," she said. "It bothers me." "And you're still doing it, the panel, the training, all of it." "Yes." He looked at her. "Why?" She thought about how to answer that honestly because it deserved honesty. "Because being bothered by how long it took doesn't give me permission to let it take longer," she said. "Those are 2 different things." He was quiet for a moment, then, "That's going in my personal philosophy somewhere." "Put it near the back," she said. "You don't want to lead with it. It sounds too tidy when you say it out loud." He laughed. A real one. The unexpected kind that surprised him slightly. It was a good sound. Hayes came on a Saturday. Not to Brenton, not to any official setting. He came to the Harwick Logistics Depot where she was finishing a half-day of work, and he waited in the parking lot the way Ellison had waited at her building, without certainty that he'd be received, without the protection of an official context to make it easier. She saw him through the window when she was packing up, recognized him. Not the swagger of the cafeteria, just a man in civilian clothes standing in a parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets. She went out. He turned when he heard her. He looked worse than he had 3 weeks ago, not in a damaged way, just in the way of someone who had been doing the kind of internal work that shows on the face before it shows anywhere else. "I wasn't sure you'd come out," he said. "You weren't sure you were going to be here either," she said. "You've been sitting in that car for 20 minutes. He exhaled. "Yeah." He looked at her. "The letter. I know you got it. I know it's part of the record. I didn't write it for the record." "I know." "I wrote it because—" He stopped, started again. "I've been trying to figure out what I actually thought I was doing in the cafeteria. Not what I'd say to a review board, what I actually thought." He looked at the ground for a moment. "I think I thought you didn't belong there. Not because of a regulation, because of something I just assumed, without thinking about it." She waited. "I've been thinking about where that comes from," he said, "and I don't have a clean answer. I just know it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong while I was doing it, and I did it anyway." He met her eyes. "That's the part I can't make less bad. I knew." "No," she said. "You felt like you knew. There's a difference. What you knew was that I wasn't in uniform. The rest of it was filling in the blanks with something you'd absorbed somewhere. Does that make it better?" "It makes it more fixable," she said. "Which isn't the same thing." He nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else and then changed direction. "Ellison told me he came to see you." "He did." He said, a pause. "He said you were surprisingly easy to talk to." He was surprised by that. He's 22. Everything surprises him. Hayes almost smiled. It was a different kind of almost smile from the one she'd seen from Halverson and Cross. Those were managed, careful. This one was uncomfortable, the smile of a person who wasn't sure they were allowed to. She looked at him. "The review, the grade reduction, the reassignment." "Yeah." "Is it fair?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded once. "Then we're done with the cafeteria," she said. "That's over. What you do from here is your own." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone receiving something they hadn't expected and weren't entirely sure how to hold. "What do you do?" he said slowly, with, "I don't know how to ask this." "Ask it anyway." "What do you do with people who did the same thing to you that I did, but who were never reviewed, never had any consequence? Who are still out there, in the same positions, doing the same thing?" She thought about Farley, about Wexler's countersignature, about 19 years of Oluwole knowing every form number and a lieutenant who hadn't recognized the form. "I build something that makes it harder for them to get away with it," she said. "That's what I do." He absorbed that. "Okay," he said. She went back inside to finish packing up. The gear bag arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in December, shipped from Donna Farrell's address at the War College, with a note taped to the outside that said, "It's been waiting. So have I. Lunch when you're ready." She set it on her folding table and looked at it for a moment before she opened it. The things inside were ordinary. A spare uniform blouse, a field compass she'd thought was lost, 2 paperback books she'd been reading during the Harith deployment and had never finished. A photograph she'd forgotten was there. 3 people in the photo, Harith FOB behind them, squinting against the sun. She was on the right, younger by 7 years, thinner, with the look of someone who had not yet done the math on the 4th extraction point and had no idea she was about to. She put the photograph on the shelf with the books she'd actually read. She found the field notebook at the bottom of the bag. It was a different one from the current one, older, the cover worn through at the corners, the pages dense with deployment notes, inventory codes, structural surveys, the working record of a person doing a job that required precision in difficult conditions. She opened it to page 34. The margin calculations were there, 17 pages worth, cramped and exact, the handwriting of someone who had been working fast in low light and couldn't afford to lose a line. She sat at the table and read through them. They were correct. She'd known they were correct. They'd had to be. The 11 men were proof they were correct. But reading them now, 2 years removed, with the emotional distance of time, she saw something she hadn't been able to see when she was writing them. They were also good, not just functional, good engineering. The kind of solution that arrived at the right answer by the most direct possible path. No wasted steps, no elegant detours, just the problem and the solution and the exact minimum of what was needed to connect them. Harmon had said they'd solved a structural load problem that engineers had been working toward in lab conditions for a decade. She had done it on page 34 of a field notebook, in the margin, at hour 5 of 6 hours alone in a damaged structure, because she needed to know if the wall would hold, and there was no one else to ask. The wall had held. She closed the notebook, put it on the shelf next to the photograph. She sat there for a while in the small apartment, the December light coming through the window at the low angle of the season, and she let herself feel the full weight of it for the first time. Not managed, not rationed, just the whole thing at once. The ridge, the math, the 11 men, the 2 years of coming back, of depot manifests and a knee that ached in the cold, and learning to sleep in rooms that were too quiet. Hayes and Reed and Ellison and Obie, Farrell keeping a bag in storage because she didn't have an address. She felt all of it. It took about 10 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Farrell. "Lunch," she said when Farrell answered. "Next week. You pick the place." "I already have a place," Farrell said. "I made the reservation 3 weeks ago." "Of course you did. How's the notebook?" Abigail looked at the shelf. The photograph. The notebook. The book she'd never finished and was probably never going to finish. "It's good," she said. "Harmon called me this morning," Farrell said. "The research proposal is being submitted to the funding committee in January. Your name is on it, with all the context." "I know. She told me." "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it. Honest question, deserved an honest answer. "Like someone found something I buried and it turned out not to be buried," she said. "Like it was just sitting there, waiting to be found." Farrell was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's exactly what it was." The formal results of the regional audit were published in the first week of February, 4 months after the cafeteria incident at Brenton. The document was dense, 78 pages of findings and recommendations, the kind of report that moved through institutional channels rather than making headlines, but that had real weight in the places that mattered. The findings confirmed systemic failure in the contractor complaint queue across 11 of the 14 installations. The 7-day mandatory response track was adopted as regional policy. A new oversight mechanism, a mixed civilian-military review committee with rotating contractor representation, was established to monitor compliance. Hayes's case was cited in the findings, once, as the proximate incident that had surfaced the systemic pattern. His name was not in the public version of the document. His grade reduction and reassignment stood. Farley's case was under active IG inquiry, cited in the findings with his name in the formal record, the resolution memo, the documentation of the third complaint. The public findings described the incident without naming him. A commanding officer who improperly resolved a contractor harassment complaint by reassigning the complainant, but the formal record had his name attached to every page. Wexler's inquiry was ongoing. His name did not appear in the public findings. It appeared in the sealed IG record next to the countersignature. And it would be there when the inquiry concluded, and it would be there in whatever decision followed that conclusion. Abigail read the full 78 pages on a Saturday morning with coffee in her apartment at the folding table. She made margin notes, as she always did, because reading without marking was a habit she'd never developed. She noted the 4 sections where the language could have been sharper, the 2 recommendations that needed more specificity to be actionable, the 1 finding where the evidence cited didn't fully support the conclusion drawn. She sent a 5-point memo to Burroughs on Monday. He replied the same day. Agreed on 3 of 5. Sending revision request to the drafting team. Thank you. The War College consultation with Dr. Harmon turned into a formal advisory relationship, separate from the panel work, occupying 1 day per month. The research proposal went to the funding committee. In March, it was funded, not fully, a partial grant that would support 2 years of preliminary work, enough to begin. Harmon called to tell her, and Abigail could hear in her voice the specific quality of someone who had been working towards something for a long time and was still processing that it had actually arrived. Your name is on the grant, Harmon said. As a contributing researcher, I want to make sure you understand what that means practically. I understand. It means your work on that ridge is part of an academic research record now, formally, permanently. Abigail looked at the shelf across the room, the photograph, the notebook. I know, she said. How do you feel about it? Like it took a long time to end up in the right place, she said, but it got there. The contractor training program launched at Brenton in April with a formal session that included all active personnel, mandatory attendance, no exceptions. Oluwole delivered the opening remarks, which were short and precise and better than anything the training division had drafted in their 3 attempts. Finch ran the technical module. Abigail ran the veteran contractor section. She stood in front of a room of about 60 people in uniform, various ranks, various branches. And she did not tell them her service record. She did not invoke the ridge or the math or 6 hours and 11 minutes alone. She just told them what she'd observed as a contractor in 18 months of walking installations in a plain blue shirt, the invisible friction, the assumed hierarchy of belonging, the way expertise got dismissed when it wasn't packaged in the right clothing. She told them about Oluwole's form number, about Finch's 11 days, about a complaint queue with a 47-day response window that was now 7. She told them that the people who came back in contractor roles weren't diminished versions of what they had been. They were the same people, carrying the same knowledge, working in a different uniform. And that confusing the uniform for the person was a mistake with consequences, the kind of consequences she had now spent 5 months documenting in detail. She did not perform this. She did not make it inspiring. She made it specific and clear, the way she made everything specific and clear, because specificity was what changed behavior and inspiration wore off by Thursday. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then Reed, who was sitting in the 3rd row because he'd transferred to the training division in January, and this was now technically his session to oversee, raised his hand. Question, he said. She looked at him. Go ahead, Gunnery Sergeant. What's the right response when you see it happening? In real time, in the room, not after the fact. She thought about Ellison, standing there in the cafeteria, knowing it was wrong and not saying anything. About the specific cost of that calculation, and the specific cost Ellison had carried out of it, and the way he'd driven to her building in the rain because that cost had been too high. Say something, she said, immediately, in the room. It doesn't need to be dramatic, it just needs to be said. She held Reed's gaze. The intervention that matters is the small one. The, hey, that's not how we do this. The one that happens before it becomes a situation. That's the whole point of the training, not to teach you what to do after it's already a record. To teach you what to do before it needs to be won. Reed nodded. The room was quiet for a moment more. Then from somewhere in the middle of the rows, a hand went up, and then another, and then the conversation started. Real questions, specific scenarios, the kind of engagement that meant the room was actually in it rather than waiting to leave. She answered every question. Aaron Ellison texted her in May. I got my transfer. New post in June. I wanted to tell you before I went. She replied, good, stay out of trouble. Working on it, he sent back. Then, I said something last week. A petty officer was giving a contractor a hard time over a form number. I said something right there, in the room. She looked at the text for a moment. How did it go? She replied. Awkward, he wrote. The petty officer was annoyed. The contractor looked surprised. I felt weird for the rest of the day. That's how it goes, she wrote. Yeah, he replied. But I said it. She put the phone down. She was at her folding table. She'd bought a real desk in February, a wooden one from a second-hand shop down the street, but she still used the folding table when she was working, out of habit. And outside the window, the May light was doing something completely different from the November light of 6 months ago, softer, longer, the season having turned while she was inside the work. She looked around the apartment. It was still small, still a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. Still the showerhead she'd finally gotten maintenance to replace in March. But there was more on the shelf, the photograph, both notebooks, the books she'd never finished, and 2 new ones she was actually reading, and a copy of the audit findings document that she'd marked up in 4 colors and referred to regularly. There was a framed copy of the War College Research Grant acknowledgement on the wall, because Farrell had sent it as a gift, and Abigail had hung it not out of pride, but because Farrell would have asked about it, and she didn't want to explain why it was in a drawer. She looked at it now. Her name in the middle of the text, plain and factual, no decoration around it, contributing researcher. Field engineering solutions under extreme operational conditions. She thought about what she'd told Finch. Being bothered by how long it took doesn't give me permission to let it take longer. She thought about what she'd told Hayes. I build something that makes it harder for them to get away with it. She thought about Ellison texting from somewhere on a military installation, reporting back like it mattered, because it did. She thought about Obi, in Denton, who was now consulting on the audit's secondary phase, the remediation monitoring, the hardest part, the part that came after the findings and before the change was actually real. She thought about the wall on the 4th extraction point, compromised but not failed, and the 11 men who walked through it, and the math that made it possible, and the years it took for the math to find its way off the margin of a field notebook and into a funded research program and into the record. Some things took a long time to end up in the right place. That was not the same as never arriving. She picked up her notebook, the current one, not the archive, opened to a fresh page and wrote the first line of the revised training curriculum for the 2nd phase. Outside, the May afternoon went on. The city went about its ordinary work. And in a small apartment in Harwick, a woman in a plain blue shirt bent over a notebook and kept going, not because it was easy, not because it was finished, but because the work was real and she was the right person to do it. And that had never, in her experience,